3 different groups, each set out to build a youth shelter at the same time and in the same community. Only one succeeded. This video shows you why and gives you the exact system you need to be successful if you're thinking about starting a new nonprofit of your own. So who am I? I'm a lawyer and former VP of grant making at a foundation, where I help direct millions in annual grants a year. And I've met with dozens of people who want to start a nonprofit because they see a real need, and they think that's enough. They believe if the cause is good, the money will just appear. But here's the hard truth. That belief might be sabotaging your success and the change you want to create. Because nonprofits are just like any other business. You need to offer a solution to a real problem, and here's the key, that someone will actually pay for. Just because a need exists doesn't mean there's a funder ready to back it. Through this story, one I lived through as a funder helping make these decisions, you're going to learn a 3-part framework to validate your nonprofit business model before you even get started, so you can avoid the heartbreak and burnout that plagues so many well-meaning founders. If that's you, watch this video, for yourself and for those you want to serve, because good intentions don't pay the bills, and they don't solve social challenges very well either. Now I want to be clear about something up front. This video uses some direct language about what worked and what didn't, but I mean no disrespect to any of the founders, volunteers, or board members involved in the efforts that ultimately didn't last. Their hearts were absolutely in the right place, and each one provided real help to different people who truly needed it. My intention isn't to tear down anyone's efforts, but to share what I learned as an insider about the factors that determine which community initiatives take root and which ones struggle. Because here's the thing. The lack of information about how funding actually works is itself a systemic barrier. And my goal is to help overcome that barrier by sharing knowledge that's usually only available to insiders. So let's get into it. This story starts in 2010 in Toledo, Ohio, when a shocking statistic hit the community. The research subcommittee of the Ohio Trafficking in Persons Study Commission noted that Metro Toledo ranks 4th in the nation, behind Miami, Portland, and Las Vegas, when it comes to raw numbers of arrests, investigations, and rescues of children involved in sex trafficking. And who was considered the #1 risk group for this? Runaway and homeless youth. In 2014, our local juvenile court saw 159 runaway charges filed, which was likely a severe undercount. And at the time, studies showed that within 24 to 48 hours of being on the street, 1 in 3 runaways would be approached by a trafficker. And why were they there in the first place? Well, at that time, Toledo, Ohio had a very high level of poverty. And most of these kids were running from something terrible. Violence, sexual abuse, or being thrown out for simply coming out to their parents. And there was really no place for them to go. Because if you were 18 and showed up at an adult homeless shelter without a parent or guardian, you'd be turned away, because they just weren't set up for that. And at one point, this community had a runaway youth shelter, but it had closed many years ago. The gap was obvious. Smart, compassionate people wanted to help. And that's when the challenge started. See, we don't ever learn in school how nonprofits, government programs, and public or private funding for such things actually work. Local media uniformly celebrates new nonprofits as the next feel-good human interest story. We see billboards out there like this. We hear about all these mega foundations out there. And some nonprofits do become wildly successful, just like the Seattle arts nonprofit that grew from $44 to nearly $92 million in revenue in just 1 year. They're also surprisingly easy to start, just a few $100 and some paperwork. It's one of the reasons why we have over 2 million nonprofits in the US. So when enough caring people in Toledo, Ohio noticed this crisis, something predictable happened. 3 groups, independent of each other, decided to get to work to create their own emergency shelter for runaway youth. I watched as 2 new nonprofits emerged, each filing paperwork and beginning fundraising within months of each other. But by 2016, another shelter had opened its doors, and it remains open to this day. So just what was it that made these 2 organizations fall away, and one of them succeed? Well, it all comes down to a 3-step framework you've got to learn if you are trying to start a new nonprofit or social venture. What these 3 steps do is validate your model with crystal clarity so that you know before you ever file the paperwork whether your idea can actually work in the real world. And here they are. Number 1, define question 0. What is it that you're really trying to solve? Number 2, map your civic ecosystem, meaning identify who else is in this space. And number 3, learn your civic wallet. In other words, figure out where the money is to pay for it. So let's start with the first one, question 0. But know that we're going to come back to it at the end, and that's where you'll see the real power of getting this one right. So question 0 is a term that comes from Herman Leonard, a professor at Harvard Business School. It's the key question. It asks, what exactly are we trying to accomplish here anyway? And for two groups at the grassroots level, that answer was obvious. How can we give homeless, runaway, LGBTQ youth a safe place? The founders of both of these grassroots groups had lived experience and professional experience. They saw a real need, they had genuine passion, and they were willing to put in the work. They spoke to other people in the community, they got the support of board members with status, knowledge, and connections, and they filed their nonprofit paperwork. But here's where that second step comes in. Because what those two groups didn't do before they filed was fully tap into a network of agencies that was already working on this exact same problem. This is a step that starts to separate successful nonprofits from the ones that burn out, mapping your civic ecosystem. And here's how you can do it. Imagine you're standing in front of a blank whiteboard. You're about to tackle this problem that matters to you, in this case, helping homeless runaway youth. Now, before you write down your solution, fill that whiteboard with everyone and everything that might touch this issue in your community. Start broad, really broad. Who already serves these kids? What agencies deal with homelessness? Who handles child welfare? What about mental health services? Who investigates trafficking? What about the courts that see these cases? The schools these kids dropped out of? The hospitals that treat them? The police who find them on the streets? Keep going. What about the organizations who fund this work? Foundations, government agencies, United Way, churches. Who studies this problem? Universities, research institutes. Who makes the laws and regulations? City council, county commissioners, state legislators. Fill that entire whiteboard. Because every single one of those players has knowledge, resources, and connections that could help or hurt your efforts. But here's the key. You can't just make the list and call it done. You've actually got to reach out to these people. Call them, email them, meet them for coffee, form real relationships. And I'm not talking about 5 people. I'm talking more about like 40 to 50. And when you talk to them, ask lots and lots of questions, like, what do you think is causing this problem? What do you think the solution is? Why do you think nobody is offering it yet? What would you do if you had more resources? And why do you think you don't have them now? What laws and regulations govern this type of work? Are there laws or policies that might be creating or actually worsening this problem? There are many, many questions you can ask, and you can get a lot of those in my free guide to grants down below. But the last question might be your most important one yet. Who else is working on this? Because every person you talk to will point you to about 3 more you didn't even know existed. And I'm not saying these two groups skipped this step. I actually heard from them as VP of Grants at the foundation pretty early, and we invited them to the table. But they did move forward to start their organizations before completing this ecosystem mapping to the degree they really needed to. And I think they also got caught up with something I want you to watch out for. It's something I call the false validators. The people or the entities that give you the sense that you are 100% on the right track. Here's the first one. Getting that IRS determination letter certainly feels like a success. It feels like you're on your way to getting grants and donations. But don't be confused. The IRS approves 50,000 nonprofits each year, and as long as you meet the basic requirements and pay the fee, you're good to go. Now, this next one is even trickier. These are the community leaders out there who make you feel like your idea is going to be successful. Folks like local attorneys or CPAs who have good hearts, relevant technical knowledge, or even board experience. And when you approach them about your idea, they may say, yes, of course, form a nonprofit. They might even complete your IRS determination paperwork for you. But unless they have actually started up successful, long-lasting, sustainable nonprofits, you certainly ought to welcome their help, but not take it as the final stamp of approval to validate your idea. And this next one might be the trickiest of all. You might have one big donor coming at you with a $10,000 check. But unless that donor is fully capable of supplying significant support over many years and has a sophisticated understanding of how to attract other big money over the long haul, even that donor can be a false validator. Now, here's why I say this step didn't feel totally complete for those two groups. Because while those two groups were focused on their own individual efforts, there was already a whole network of other players in the community working on this exact issue. And a lot of them were connected to the Human Trafficking Coalition, a group made up of law enforcement, social services, judges from juvenile court, representatives from city and county government, university professors, and major behavioral health nonprofits. And this treasure trove of information available through that coalition would have really helped both of these groups in their earliest stages, because they had a lot of collective knowledge about this next important step, breaking down your civic wallet. Because mapping the ecosystem is only half the battle. The second step is understanding your civic wallet. Now, this is the totality of public and private resources, starting in your local community and radiating outward to state and federal levels that could really support your effort. And this is where those two grassroots groups really got blindsided. A lot of people get caught up in two myths: that getting nonprofit status automatically opens up that civic wallet, or just that you can power through on energy from volunteers alone. Let's be clear. Professional nonprofits need revenue. So just like a business, you need to know, what's your business model? What's your market? What's the solution you are offering to customers in that market? And how do you know they'll pay you for it? And here's the special twist with nonprofits that many founders miss: the difference between clients and customers. And you have to validate both sides of this equation. Your clients are the people who use your services, in this case, homeless youth needing shelter. It's very obvious to spot them. So then you've got to validate that you actually have customers in the form of people and institutions who will pay you to offer that service, meaning folks like government agencies, private foundations, individual donors, United Way. Now, sometimes clients and customers are the same in the nonprofit world, where you have people who are getting the service paying a fee for it. But much of the time, they're not. And it's not just the case that because you see clients out there, that there are automatically going to be customers willing to pay you to serve them. To get this customer validation right, you first have to understand, for the solution you're offering, what does it really cost? Not just beds and food, but licensed staff, insurance, security, round-the-clock operations. If you don't have hard numbers from real-world programs, funders will not take you seriously. And once you know the real cost, the next question is brutal. Where's that money going to come from? Because if you're trying to start up something fast to meet a real community need, $25 donations won't keep the lights on. You're going to need a model that pulls in $25, $50, $100,000 chunks. And that means knowing who pays for this work and exactly why. But it's not just who funds this. It's, do they fund startups? Do they do multi-year commitments? Do they need match funding or audited financials? So you've got to talk to them, asking all of those questions that you possibly can. It's not just about writing grants. It's about getting all this information together so that when you do write grants, even as a startup, you write them from the basis of a realistic, achievable, sustainable business plan. And you know you're aligned with your customers because you're offering a solution to a problem they agree exists in a way that they can say yes to. And when you ultimately ask them, you're making that ask of people you have formed relationships with, and there is a basis of trust. So these two grassroots groups had certainly validated the client side, but they really hadn't validated the customer side to the degree they really needed to for success. The group that won out, well, they had access to lots of information and institutional knowledge about how the money in the Civic wallet actually worked in this particular community. And as I share with you how they pulled it together, what might come up for you is, well, that group certainly had an unfair advantage. And you're not wrong. But my intention with sharing how it all came together is so that when you're thinking about starting as something at the grassroots level, you'll be starting it from a stronger position. So this group, what I'll call the Grass Tops group, first determined the cost of standing up a 24/7 shelter. It would be about $600,000 minimum just to get it off the ground, and around $1.1 million annually to meet the community need at full scale. And that phrase, at scale, actually matters. You see, they didn't just want to open a shelter, they wanted to meet the actual need at the real scale at which it existed in the community. And the local juvenile court was seeing around 150 runaway youth cases in recent years. So if each one stayed an average of 4 weeks, that meant the program needed capacity for about 600 bed weeks a year, which translates to roughly 12 beds. So that was their target. And they also understood they were stepping into a very heavily regulated space. Providing shelter to minors means navigating child protective services, the courts, licensing agencies, and proving you can meet the legal and operational standards required to serve a vulnerable population like that. And that means infrastructure. It means systems for hiring, training, and supervising staff. It means a physical space that meets code. It means liability insurance, risk management, security, and oversight. Trying to build that from scratch is a multi-year endeavor. And I'm not saying it can't be done. But most nonprofit founders vastly underestimate this. And youth in the community really couldn't afford to wait. So instead of starting a new nonprofit, this group said, let's use the infrastructure we already have and establish a shelter as a program under an existing agency, one that already had everything in place. That doesn't mean startups can't work. But in this case, the fastest path forward was building on infrastructure that already existed. And that gave them two powerful advantages. Not only speed, but leverage. A magic word that makes public and private funders open up their wallets. And this is because most funders want to fund a slice of something, not the whole pie. They want to feel that their $50,000 helped bring together another $550. And they aren't often eager to pour limited dollars into what some perceive as duplicative overhead in the community. And this is something that some nonprofit founders miss. In the marketplace of public and philanthropic funding, you've really got to figure out how the money works with your specific customers in your specific market. You see, this city didn't have a big private foundation writing $500,000 checks. Most community foundation grants were in the $25,000 to $100,000 range. And the local government budgets were tight. The tax base had been shrinking, and every dollar had to stretch a lot farther. So when 3 different groups proposed launching a youth shelter, funders didn't see 3 bold visions. They saw 3 payroll systems, 3 accounting departments, 3 sets of admin costs. Now, folks like Dan Pallotta rightly challenge this scarcity mindset that exists for some funders. But if it exists in your community, you ought to factor it into your plan, so you can be more informed when you're making your case. Now, in a bigger metro, one of those grassroots groups might have landed a game-changing grant from a private foundation that specializes in supporting early-stage grassroots efforts. The Civic wallet works very differently in different places. So how do you figure out how the money really works in your community? Well, here's a shortcut I used back when I worked at a nonprofit myself, that this group used too. They invited funders directly into the planning meetings. Not to ask them for a check on day one, but to let them shape the plan. Because when funders help create the blueprint, they're far more likely to fund the construction. So to pull together that $800,000, they started stacking what I'll call the fast money. Startup dollars that could move within a year. They lined up 5 foundation grants, local government funds from numerous sources like the county, city, welfare department, juvenile court, children's services, the mental health board. And then the lead agency chipped in with its own fee-for-service revenue. And all of that was the bridge to what I'll call the tough money, the federal grant that was out there to support runaway shelters. Which brings us to the total. Now, some founders assume a federal grant will launch their idea. But in reality, federal money only flows to organizations that are already built to handle it. Applying for one of these grants isn't something you do overnight. It's a 100 to 200 hour process, and it often requires hundreds of thousands in matching funds. But this group, they had the audit trail, they had the match funding lined up, and they had the infrastructure to meet all the program requirements. So they went after it and they were ultimately successful. And within a year, the 12-bed shelter was up and running. And it's still going strong today, nearly 10 years later. So if you're a grassroots founder watching this and thinking, I don't have fee-for-service revenue, or I don't know the heads of local foundations, don't let that stop you. Let it focus you. The group that succeeded didn't win just because they were polished or well-connected. They won out because they understood how to use the 3-step framework in this particular community. And you can do that too. Now, you might be wondering what happened to the other 2 groups. And before I answer that, we need to return to that question that shaped everything. Remember what I told you earlier about question 0? Well, that was just the beginning. Think about the difference between these 2 questions. How do we help homeless LGBTQ youth in Northwest Ohio? Versus, how do we bring an end to youth homelessness in Northwest Ohio? That difference between helping and ending changes everything. Because when you want to end a problem, you're forced to confront it at the true scale at which it exists. You stop thinking in terms of just services and start thinking in terms of systems. You're not just building a shelter. You're asking, how do we ensure no youth are on the streets? How do we create comprehensive coordination between law enforcement, courts, and social services? How do we eliminate the conditions that make youth vulnerable to trafficking in the first place? The Grasstops group understood that their shelter wasn't just about providing beds. It was about helping to disrupt an entire pipeline of exploitation and serving as just one element of a broader system change, which led to other improvements for vulnerable young people. For example, this community now has a supportive housing provider for youth aging out of foster care, when they used to just be put out on the street at 18. That's the power of question 0. It pulls you into a much larger conversation with everybody who is actively working on and investing in the welfare of youth. And it motivates them to take action, which is important because, at least in this country, all of these players aren't mandated by some top-down force. No one requires a local community to fund a youth shelter. But the right question shines a light, and it invites them, it motivates them to be part of the solution. And when you bring together those minds, systems, and budgets, you don't just build a shelter, you build a smarter, stronger response than you ever could alone. So I encourage you to start with question 0. Form some idea about what you might want to accomplish, but be willing to let it evolve and help you find the right path for you in all of this. You see, both of these grassroots groups began by asking, how do we help vulnerable LGBTQ youth in Northwest Ohio? And they were really focused on service to that specific population. So after they learned more about their civic ecosystem and their civic wallet, and they participated as members of this community-level conversation, they each decided to pivot. One of them launched a daytime drop-in center for LGBTQ youth, sustained through modest fundraising and a dedicated group of volunteers. and the other focused on consulting, advocacy, and training, helping ensure that the Grass Tops shelter effort would truly serve the needs of LGBTQ youth in ways that larger systems can often get wrong. So what's the takeaway? It's not that passion doesn't matter. All three groups had that. And it's not that grassroots groups can't succeed. They absolutely can. But if you want to create lasting change, instead of just another well-meaning organization that eventually burns out, ask the right question zero. Map your civic ecosystem and understand your own civic wallet before you ever file the paperwork. Because here's what I've learned after nearly 20 years working inside government and philanthropy. The problems we care about are solvable. There are still tremendous resources out there for the common good, especially when you start from the standpoint of your local community. But they challenge us to start thinking bigger than individual organizations and start thinking like coordinated communities. Those kids who needed help in Toledo are getting it today, nearly 10 years later, because one group really understood the power in that. And now you do too. So if you'd like more help with your social venture or nonprofit, check out the links below. Get my free Insider's Guide to Grants, and I'll see you on the next video.